Judge, imagine a workplace that is fraught with information discrepancies and employees that hold grudges against each other, and employers that are biased and don't see the full potential of every person. That unfortunately is a slice of what modern life in an office looks like. However, if we take the motion as face value, that is implementing transparency, we can solve all of these issues at a swipe. And in our world, every employee would have their information shared and made available to everybody, regardless of status, and they would also rank each other regularly based on each other's characteristics and their behavior, so they can review each other based on how well they are performing or how well they're treating others. By definition, these corporations are companies where employees are paid to work together to make a product or service and to often achieve a goal. And we believe that the stakeholders here are our employees. Employers also matter, but they are not the main concern here. Radical transparency, which is what we are advocating for, is a recording or notes of every conversation, meeting, and a report that is made in a report that is available to everybody, usually on a company database. Some examples of things that appear here could be salary changes, promotions, and daily profit. Recordings of meetings could also be here too. Our world looks like a place where people practice and use radical transparency frequently and is often implemented. This this would be a place where everybody receives the same opportunities and is under the protection of radical transparency. It is our burden to prove that such measures ensure fairness and protection to employees while helping them grow, as well as giving them an equal chance at everything, and perhaps even helping some employees overcome their own personal problems. But first things first, full transparency makes work environments much more safer, because when you have a recording or documents of each activity employees have undertaken and are visible to everybody, there's an incentive to behave at your best. Because firstly, you do not want your coworkers to know your poor behavior that could isolate you socially, nor do you want your superiors to know because they control your salary. And knowing knowing everybody could see what you are doing would very much discourage troublemakers from causing incidents, at least on the company grounds. And now our opponents would probably have an argument that concerns privacy, such as no matter what we say, privacy is still an issue and we need to respect the privacy of everybody. True, privacy is a right and we need to respect that. But what good would privacy do if the company can't even keep track of and keep in line its own employees, right? If we can't maintain workplace safety, if people are getting slandered, if people are being treated poorly, and the employers don't know, what good would privacy do, right? You're basically just allowing people to get treated poorly. And concerning fairness, if information transparency was implemented, there will be no withholding of information. What does this mean? This means that whenever you want to access something, you'll have access to it. Whenever, say, you need a file, you can have it because information transparency here. And if you want to know about somebody, like where they live, so you can contact them, their contact numbers, etc., that can be easily arranged. And for
Johan,
consider yes.
don't you think it's a safety concern that employees can access other employees' private sensitive information, like where they live? Wouldn't that be a safety concern and could lead to stalking or harassment outside of the workplace?
True. If we allow people to know where each other live, there may be harassment outside the workplace, but but our employees, firstly, we're not saying that this does not happen, but our victims, they can still complain to their managers. And again, due to this motion, this will be shared to everybody. So again, that person that victimizes your victim, they would likely not have a great time at work after the incident was reported, right? Because now their coworkers, they will shun him or her or them, and their superiors would likely pass them over for promotion later, excuse me. And continuing on my speech, workplace conflicts can be easily resolved here because we can these two people or these groups of people, they can either search up each other online, or they can take a look at what's happening. They can see what is happening and perhaps they can resolve it. Or if things really get out of hand, which is second scenario, these managers, they can interfere, and they can to a great extent because they know everything about this conflict. So it will be resolved quite easily as compared to opposition's world. And finally, every employee is seen and hence has an equal chance for benefits and promotions at the end of the line. So we are essentially giving people an equal to be seen, to be heard, and to be appreciated. And so in our world, we have thus far offered to protect people, to share information, to ensure fairness, and to give people an equal chance of succeeding. Thank you.
Although this debate may seem like a discussion about only employee privacy and accountability, the impacts of it are way wider than that. The idea of radical transparency completely breaches all ideas of corporate privacy and the security of information for the corporations. In a capitalist world where breakthrough innovations are led by private corporations and companies, this is detrimental not just to individual industries and companies involved, and to the economy, but to all people all across the world. At its core, this debate is about whether shallow ideas of accountability should completely crash private industry innovation and the economy as a whole. Radical transparency, by destroying corporate security and the security of private entities within various economies, destroys economic security too, and therefore impacts people all around the world. To add on to some definitions that site government provided, I would like to add on to the definition of corporations. Corporations are basically incorporated companies that are legally separate from their owners. And basically, these corporations are just massive companies, right? They have huge amounts of resources and contribute vastly to the economy and innovation all across the world. And therefore, these corporations aren't just regular businesses like side government sort of talks about in their definition. There are these massive companies whose operations impact people all across the world on a very large scale, very deeply. So moving on to my rebuttals. First off, I would like to rebut side government's claim that employers don't matter as much as other actors like the public, the common people, and employees in this debate. As I've stated before, these corporations that we're discussing in today's debate are huge fund runners in worldwide innovation in the economy. There's a reason they can do bad things with such lack of punishment nowadays. They have huge power. If we disregard the satisfaction of these employers of these corporations in this debate, then we face the risk of massive backlash from them that could have massive impacts on people all across the world. Additionally, the law protects these corporations and their rights, which includes the right to privacy. If we start ignoring the rights that these corporations have, no matter how powerful these corporations are, they still have rights, then we completely breach the idea of law altogether. Moving on to my second rebuttal about their statement about keeping track of employees and business activities, which is the biggest argument stated in PM's speech. Now, first off, HR exists for a reason. They gave no reason why existing solutions like human resource departments could not receive more funding or expansion within these corporations in order to solve these problems more effectively, or even any reason why perhaps even laws can be passed by big governments to make sure that employee relations are managed more soundly within corporations. Employees should be able to as we have POI'd them, employees should be able to choose what information they disclose rather than having all their information leaked, revealed in their placement employment leaked to anyone who wants it. Because radical transparency means you can ask for any information about information provided in the workplace, and it will be provided to you. And this is a massive breach of employee privacy. Yes.
The information provided will be strictly contained within professional or working ground type of information, meaning that it would probably be the messages you sent or the files you sent in the corporate.
Well, one of our speakers already POI'd you and talked about private information being leaked, and you conceded to that being a risk. And so I don't know why you're backtracking now and trying to say that certain messages sent to maybe employee group chats are the only thing that's going to be revealed, even though your PM already conceded that a lot of private information, like their addresses and their phone numbers, that they may not have consented to being revealed and to everyone who they work with being revealed. I don't know why you're trying to backtrack now, but even then, all this information, these employees should have a right to decide what information they want to be shared to their higher up and what information they want to share to everyone in the corporation. And this is just a massive breach of their privacy. And as PM has conceded, this holds a massive risk of harm being done to these people. This holds a massive risk of stalking. Because let's face it, there's already a lot of violence and crimes committed between employees in the workplace. There's a lot of stalking from male coworkers, stalking female coworkers. And so by allowing all information provided in the workplace to be disclosed to anyone, this just worsens that problem on a massive scale. Also, businesses or activities are managed more than well enough in the status quo, especially since these corporations are so big and they have such good organization and they have so many resources. And so them basing their entire case on the idea of keeping track of employees and business activities is completely irrelevant, especially in this debate. Overall, they can also completely ignore the major clashes of this debate, like the big implications on the worldwide economy and the common people, and they only narrow this debate down to the effectiveness that these companies run with, which just ignores such massive aspects of what this debate is about, as I will be getting on in my argument. So moving on to my first argument about stifled innovation. My claim is that radical transparency stifles corporate innovation on a scale that is detrimental to the economy and industry and people all around the world. In today's world, the relationship between corporations is extremely competitive, right? To the point where corporate espionage is a thing where basically employees sell corporate secrets to other companies in order to gain money. And choices made by large corporations must always consider their competitors and the industry as a whole. And private industry innovation comes from secrets. Big corporations take risky leaps in innovation because they believe that they have security, and no matter whether or not these attempts fail at first, this information will not be disclosed to the public and their competitors, and therefore they will not face backlash. And they will also not face idea theft. When radical transparency is implemented, secrets are sure to be leaked because employees within a corporation, which is a very large amount of people, can request any information at any time, and all information is recorded. Even if some employees are loyal, most of them aren't. They're driven by money, and corporate espionage is a massive way to make money, and they simply do not have any allegiance to the company that they work with. When corporations know their competitors are aware of their plans, they do not take as many innovative risks because this is because they fear idea theft from their competitors and also big reactionary actions taken to potential failures, since innovation always comes with big risks. With radical transparency in place, large corporations which run innovation in various industries across the world stagnate because they fear their failures are going to be taken advantage of by the public and their competitors. All corporations are private entities, so they're driven by money. Innovative failures cost a lot of money because innovations as a whole cost a lot of money. And so by implementing radical transparency, you'd basically be stifling innovation all across the world on a massive scale. The impact of this is mass stagnation of industries and innovation. Since basically all industries nowadays are led by private entities like corporations, for example, OpenAI or Claude in the AI industry, in the healthcare industry, this stagnation will lead to new things all across the world stop developing, which would have massive effects on people because the technology that they need to improve their lives would be halted in development. And it's for these reasons that we are so proud to oppose it.
As a second proposition, we believe that corporations must practice radical transparency for a few reasons. I'll explain that further in my speech. But firstly, I'd like to go over my rebuttal and then over my argument. What are a few points that the opposition side talk about? Firstly, they tell you that we should value privacy. Why does this point not stand? We think that privacy does not matter because privacy in this case is only a tool for people to, let's just say, bully the vulnerable, or let's just say in these corporates make unfair treatment plans towards the vulnerable people, right? We think that the most important people in this debate today are the vulnerable workers that are currently working their lives off, right? We think that when people are able to abuse and exploit these workers, people in the opposition side will not be able to capture those who victimize others, right? Because of the so-called privacy. We think that when privacy sacrifices like the safety hood of other people, we think that privacy does not matter as much. But secondly, they tell you how there can be other alternatives, such as funding the HR department more, or so be it, something like that. We think that radical transparency helps the HR department make better decisions, and we think that we flip the point by saying that HR departments can function even better, and we'll be able to capture any sort of internal crime much more easier. But the main argument is destroying innovation and selling company information. Firstly, we think that we think that since corporations are such big companies such as Apple, Microsoft, and and like Google or anything like that, we know that even if other companies are able to copy these sorts of corporations, that they would still not be able to catch up to these big corporations because they are really big corporations, whereas the other competitors are much smaller, right? For example, a competitor of Apple would be, let's say, Oppo. Even if Oppo was able to copy Apple, then Apple would still win no matter what, right? Because that's how big of a lead. So we think that even if this companies are able to sell off these types of information, that will still not destroy the innovation of these big companies. To your POI, no, not yet. What is our argument today? My argument is very simple. We create a fairer meritocracy. In the status quo, corporates operate at a secret, right? Every decision, every promotion, every firing happens without a real reason. People may be promoted not because of their contributions towards a company, but rather because due to like kissing up, flattery, or other sorts of things. We think that overall, this creates an unfair system towards workers and also slows down company profits, and this is very harmful. What does our world look like? In our world, everything is accessible, including emails, files, and messages. At the end of each day, or at the end of each period, people will be able to rate each other and be given a score. What are the benefits of this? 3 benefits. Firstly, we think that there's absolute fairness because everybody can easily see who has contributed the most. Everybody can see who hasn't contributed that much. And instead of placing your whole career in your boss's hands due to them liking you or not, we think that this transparency allows you to place all that responsibility on yourself, right? You're able to see like who has done the most, who has done the least, who deserves the promotion, who doesn't, right? Secondly, this leads on to the second benefit, that it incentivizes people to work harder. Because when you know that your job is now on your hands, right? It's on how much you work and how much you contribute. We think that this removes the majority of kissing up and it replaces it with how much you work, right? So if you want a promotion, instead of kissing up or like maybe making a boss happy, instead you try to work hard and it incentivizes you to work and help the company. We understand that these sorts of ratings or these systems may still be influenced by these external factors or your social life and etc. However, even in the worst case scenario of our proposition side, at least we can judge whether or not this decision was fair, and we can see the majority of transparency in the company. But third benefit here, we think that sharing of knowledge and this transparency can increase company efficiency. Firstly, we think that the access of information is easier, meaning that instead of employees trying to hoard like information or hoard files to be able to ensure their own promotion, we think that just the sharing of these types of information and files allows the whole company itself to work better. But secondly, we think that when everybody has these types of files, then there is a fairer like competition between internally in the company that allows people to be promoted for fair reasons, right? And overall, this allows the companies to operate more efficiently and get more profits overall. What are the impacts here? Firstly, on a magnitude level, we think that there's more fairness for the workers, right? Because now every decision has a real reason behind it. People can see the reason, people can see the ratings, and you now know what is fair, what is not, right? But secondly, on a magnitude level, we think that there's just more efficiency for the company overall, because now that every information is interlinked, interchanged, and allowed to be shared overall, we think that there's more efficiency for the company, and counter to the opponent's side about saying less development and less innovation. We think that there's going to be more development and more innovation because now you're able to move more efficiently as a company, and we think that that is overall better. But next, on a scale level, we think that our impacts are very big because we affect both the workers who work inside the company. They're able to get a fair treatment, but also the companies as a whole because nowadays they're able to work more efficiently. We think that on a scale level, we are also very important. Why do we win this debate then? We think that we proved to you why corporate decisions are now fairer. We proved to you why corporate decisions are now fairer, and we also proved to you why companies move more efficiently overall. And because of this, please vote for proposition side. Thank you.
Panel, I don't think side government actually understands how these corporations actually work. And I'm going to explain it to you again right now. So, corporations, they're profit incentivized. And one of the main ways that they make money in the status quo is, and one of the most valuable things they actually have is this kind of secretive types of like products and types of innovation that no other corporation can replicate. Because those are the things that the consumers will think is like exclusive in that like company that they will buy. And now, I'm pretty sure it was PM or DPM that said basically that these corporations will not be affected by corporate espionage as much because, well, they're so large and another company stealing a product will not really affect them. But that's like, I feel like that's fairly like uncharitable because in most situations, corporations can be like equal of size, or at least they're big enough where this secretive product which they have is still so important, and where if other companies steal it, they will actually get this advantage. Furthermore, I'd like to note something that PM actually mentions: this idea of having full access to all of this data if you're in like the entire employee database. And now, if we basically take what PM says at face value, this kind of means that corporate espionage will never actually be easier than this. Because, I mean, either from leaks from maybe like fired low-level employees with full access, by the way, as PM says, to all these databases, or from very easy infiltration from other companies, because again, every employee has this full access. Well, then companies will again just be highly incentivized to not innovate. And another one of these impacts is also from the fact that, yeah, these large corporations, they're responsible for so many global innovations. This looks like research, which goes into making maybe medical cures. This looks like technology, which could solve employment gaps or other global problems. I think this impact is pretty large in of itself, right? Second rebuttal about kind of this idea of this unfair treatment and basically evaluating performance. DPM really talks quite a lot about how this system will basically allow them to evaluate employees more fairly. But we think this already happens. Corporations, they already have more objective, actually, performance metrics. This looks like maybe just counting the amount of sales someone makes or the amount of hours someone spends on their computer, right? There's so many different metrics that these companies can already use that rely on actual numbers instead of recordings of like, I don't know, employees talking to each other, right? And I think for this point, side government just has to prove a much more significant benefit for it to provide any impacts to this debate. Now, my argument actually also engaged pretty well with this, and it's on a reduction of collaboration between employees. So let's establish, when do people actually collaborate? We think this happens because of two things. First of all, I think happens when they're like trusting of others. And second of all, we think this is because they feel kind of free to speak up ideas on the spot without their specific wording kind of being scrutinized. And of course, then they don't collaborate when they're kind of more suspicious of these coworkers and have to think like kind of more carefully of what exact words to say and think about what will be used against them. So how is this linked to radical transparency, and why is this the line we draw that kind of stops this collaboration? Well, uh, the modern economy, what it looks like is a lot of jobs are really specialized, and these markets are just incredibly competitive for like any worker really, and jobs are just overall harder to find, they're harder to keep. And not only that, but the cost of living has increased a lot. This means that every worker is really heavily incentivized to compete with their co-workers for promotion, so they have like more money to live life in this day and age, right? And this radical transparency, well, first of all, it means that every interaction, as the info side says, is recorded, which allows employees to use these recordings against each other. This is actually so easy and it's like applicable to so many circumstances that, well, for example, they could take credit for an idea if they specifically mentioned it first, even when it was like part of like a larger group discussion in order to maybe claim credit for like a promotion. And when these things are so easy to do, and there's so many ways to do these, to basically claim this credit, workers who are incentivized already to compete will just take this easiest pathway to a promotion. Second of all, radical transparency means has this ranking system, right? And it inherently means that, yeah, you'll rank some people very low or like last. And this means that social interact, and the problem is social interaction, it's so nuanced, and there's so many like physical factors that recording that's audio can't really see. It's so easy to recognize these like interactions and these specific words or the tone of your employee to rank your competition low. And actually, I'll be charitable and maybe also think about if these companies have like, I don't know, if these companies require justification for these rankings. Well, still, because these social interactions are actually so nuanced, you can just take some of these like the tone of voice to justify like a lower ranking of some employee interaction. What does this mean? So this means workers will just feel less personally safe because there'll be recordings taken of them. It could be out of context. And second of all, workers will probably just don't want to talk with each other, especially the best employees, most importantly, because they're competing. And if they don't collaborate, there'll be reduced innovation and also slow response to crises. That's why I'm so proud to propose, and you should not be scared to vote side opposition.
Three things I'm trying to accomplish in my speech today. Firstly, some rebuttals to the previous speaker. Secondly, a major clash in this debate. And thirdly, doing some impact weighing to make sure that our impacts are more significant than the other side. So firstly, on some rebuttals. The other side basically talked about how with radical transparency, we stop collaboration. And they have many reasonings for this argument, right? They basically talked about people can take credit for an idea, which lets them cheat to like get a promotion. And they also talked about how ranking meetings and will make competition more tight. And since like the job market is currently very intense and people like compete with each other, this basically stops collaboration, right? We believe that this point has minimal impact, right? Because we believe that it's good to have competition, right? Especially when the first opposition speaker talked about no, the first opposition speaker talked about how like these like corporations, they're like big corporations such as like Microsoft or Apple, right? So we believe that it's normal to have competition, and we believe that competition can only make a worker better, right? It makes them actually more focused on their work. And we believe that radical transparency not only lets them like analyze the meetings and lets them like rank about like what's good and bad, like this can make their overall like skill set better, and makes them like grow. So we believe that like competition isn't necessarily a bad thing, and basically the whole like case from opposition side is extremely minimal impacting, because they also talked about like um competition in the job market, and they talked about privacy and how like this stops collaboration. We believe that even if we're being charitable, we believe that their first argument about like market competition and the previous point they talked about is it's kind of repeating, because they also talked about like competition for the previous point, right? They also talked about privacy, which our speaker is able to rebut that. So we believe that their whole case has minimal impact, right?
Right.
So then moving on to the first clash of this debate. No. So we believe that this clash is revolved around like privacy versus quality working environment, right? So we believe that the biggest point they have brought up in this debate is that privacy is a privacy can let people use others' private information and harm them like with their like private information, right? However, we told you specifically, Judge, that we ensure a safe working environment. We tell you that everyone has a chance to share and check information, and how radical transparency lets workers like evaluate themselves and rate based on like how the quality of their meetings, right? And we believe this is a good thing. Firstly, why do we win this clash? We believe that we win on two metrics. Firstly, we win on likelihood. We believe that people who use like privacy to disrupt, or even in the worst case attack each other, is way too extreme. This idea is way too extreme, and we believe this is completely unlikely. So the opposition team told you in the definition that these corporations are big companies, right? As I just said before. We believe that when workers work in these big companies, and they also talked about how the home market and the job market is extremely intense. We believe that these workers will focus mainly on the work itself, instead of like disrupting others with their private information. What is the point of doing that, right? We believe that they already have a very like competitive job, and they will try to be very careful, and like they will try to improve themselves. So we believe that when workers work in these big companies, they'll be hardworking instead of like um just disrupting others with information, right? This means that they would actually work together instead of disrupting others. This makes the probability of using private information to attack each other extremely low, right? So we believe that since the probability of this is low, we believe that the impact of this is also minimal. Secondly, we also win on profit. Um, we believe that yes, these corporations are profit driven, and they will try to like earn as much money as possible. We believe that on their side, they mainly talk about the risk of radical transparency, but not their like unique benefits, right? Because we haven't heard from their side on why like they make more profit, right? So radical transparency actually makes more profit because it ensures people review and rate meetings and work. What is so good about this? It lets people know what they did correctly and what they did not so well. For example, if their profit drops by a lot today, they can look at the radical transparency report, right? The the profit dropped a lot. They can base it off their work and like rankings, and which allows them to identify how they can make actual profit next time and how they can improve on their work, right? So then moving on to the last part, which is just simply weighing the impacts, we believe that we impact more people on a big scale, right? Big scale, right? We told you that radical transparency ensures a safe working environment where people can like share information, evaluate information, and basically just work together as a whole and work towards a goal, right? We believe that what the whole case that opposition is talking about is trying to attack like our case about this, but they don't have their own unique benefits. For example, they talked about privacy, right? But we already rebutted this by saying it's extremely low probability. Also, we talked about like competition, but we also said that competition could potentially be a good thing, right? So if everything is rebutted, it basically means that the opposition team, they have actually like minimal impacts, even if we're being charitable. And so so basically for all the reasons above, like for example, we have more impacts, we have like we win on profit and we also win on likelihood. I think that for all these reasons, I think you should vote for a proposition team. Thank you. Proud to propose.
Before any of my clashes, I would like to state that the main clash of this whole debate is development and innovation. However, first, second, and third speaker on government side hasn't talked about development at all, despite it being our both main arguments, showing how one, they have not engaged with any of our arguments, and two, they do not recognize the main clash and the most important factor in this debate. Secondly, I like to say that they came up and talked about a clash about one of their clashes being profit, despite it not coming in first or second speaker at all, and they also provided no mechanization whatsoever on how this clash would benefit their side, on how this clash would even be a possible clash at all. Now, moving on to my two main clashes, in which I will prove why side opposition wins the debate, and all my rebuttals are integrated into my two main clashes. My first clash is on side innovation, and my team has stated that radical transparency prevents as much innovation as possible. Now, this is extremely important in this debate because in the current status quo, the reason major companies are driving is because they all have their own specialties, such as OpenAI or ChatGPT, for example. And this is to do with each corporation, each having their own secrets and their own benefit and their own advantages, right? Their own research and developments. And I think they have the intensive to develop the better technology because it is all private. No other company can steal their secrets. Whatever they develop is theirs, right? And in this current status quo, we think that technology and development is already happening at a fast enough pace. And although government can come up here and say, oh, radical transparency can prevent corruption or stimulate productivity somehow, we can all agree that the most important and the winning factor of this debate is which side has overall better development and innovation. And in government's world, where research requires decades and billions of dollars, companies are afraid to do so if every plan, every experiment is documented. And they do not want to risk it being leaked because being leaked essentially means they lose tens of years in planning and they lose billions of dollars as other companies can copy them. And furthermore, a lot of the time, these innovation and ideas happen through experimentation and risky moves. Employees and researchers are afraid to experiment and do risky moves if they know that their every single action is constantly being monitored because they're always under constant stress and they want to remain as professional as possible. However, the downside is if you're always professional and you're always feeling pressure and fear, there's no way you can come up with as better innovation, especially when all you're scared of is being fired or not moving up the ranks because you are always being filmed. And this prevents companies from reaching their full potential as one, they're not investing enough money because they're scared of losing it. And two, their employees are not as productive and they can't create as better ideas because they are scared of being leaked or they're scared of being fired. And the worst case in this is that corporate espionage can happen and where companies try to steal each other's secrets. However, in the status quo, innovation is already good, meaning our government has no exclusive benefits and they only have the disadvantages that is caused by radical transparency. Any POIs? I would take that as a no. Okay, so how does government respond to us at all? Well, first they said that workplace matters can be resolved easily with this radical transparency. Well, firstly, they are not responding to our development point at all. And although this can be a concern, I get it, like workplace matters are concerns. It can be easily resolved without even needing radical transparency, and it can be solved just like coworkers telling the boss, or in extreme cases, just going to court. And however, panel, I think that workplace matters, being team government is very minor. Because team government fails to recognize that these are major corporations. These aren't just normal companies that lead the world. These companies lead the world in developing healthcare, AI, and important technology. And radical transparency, helping the workplace, isn't the largest argument it is. The largest argument in this debate is development and innovation. And the first speaker on their team has failed to mention it at all. They have failed to rebut our point on this. And they have not provided reasoning or counter policy on how development will be better on their side and failed to recognize this as a main point whatsoever in this debate. Furthermore, our side has clearly shown why development is the most important factor and how development will happen more on our side and overall benefit the entire world in terms of education, healthcare, or just overall technology development. And however, in this current status quo, development is already driving, which is why it is so crystal clear that we win this first major clash on development and innovation, because it is simply better on our status quo and on our side, and simply because they have not touched on this topic at all within first, second, or third reply speaker. And how should this debate be judged? Well, I think this debate should be judged on the main burden of proof on this debate, which is whether radical transparency is beneficial towards innovation and development. On which side does radical transparency benefit the world the most, right? And on side opposition, in the current status quo, innovation is already happening at a fast pace, behind closed doors, in secret, where companies can try whatever they want. Unlike side government, where there is less innovation drive and slower development. And even if we bite the bullet here and say that, okay, there might be some workplace problems, it can be reported using alternative methods. And the most important factor is development. And on side government, there is simply not as much development or as effective development. And they have not provided any clear mechanization on how this radical transparency will work in favor at their side whatsoever. Like, once again, they only talked about workplace issues, which is a very, very small minor part of this debate and can either be irrelevant or even if I'm being charitable and it's relevant, I have already rebutted all their points. Now, moving on to my second clash on collaboration. Well, my team has stated that with radical transparency, there will be a reduction of collaboration. And I should point out that in government's world, where every employee is competing, they are competing individually to move up the ranks. They are not competing as a team. And nobody alone can create a good enough idea and is not effective. And the only way where companies can develop ideas is when the whole company comes together to try to form an idea together. Not every employee working alone and trying to compete for the best idea. And outside government, they also haven't provided a mechanism on how collaboration will be better on their side, or employees working alone will be actually better on their side. Now, before I end this debate, I would like to think about what has government failed to respond to us about. Well, obviously, they have failed to respond to development at all, which I'm sure side government, opposition, and panel can agree is the most important factor of the debate. And because they haven't said a single sentence about this, we obviously win this development clash. They have also failed to respond to us about collaboration and how collaboration will be worse on their side. And they also talked about there will be no more kissing up to their managers in that world. Well, it's actually the opposite, because employees have to evaluate everyone all the time in their world. People will likely kiss up to their whoever is evaluating them to move up their points, which also debunks their other argument as well. For this reason, we win both clashes on development and collaboration, and we win this entire debate. Thank you so much. Proud to oppose.
First off, side government completely neglected almost all the issues being discussed in this debate. We got opposition explain how we live in a capitalist world where innovation and breakthroughs are led by these corporations in question, and how this motion would crash to their security and the worldwide economy as a result. We discussed how healthcare and AI are affected by these corporate interests and how this motion completely neglects what these corporations want. We discussed the matter of employee privacy and safety and how dangerous it is to publicize their private information to all the people in their workplace. We did extensive characterization of the corporate world and the state of the worldwide economy and how our points are linked to them. Again, we live in a capitalist world. Healthcare is led by corporations. AI is led by corporations. Construction is led by corporations. All mass industries and all their involves breakthroughs and innovations are led by corporations and the private industry. By ignoring corporate interests and not engaging on any basis with our points about the worldwide economy and innovation and how this will affect the people, side government basically conceded that they do not care about if these corporations track towards the well-being and quality of life that the common people have. Side government completely neglected this major argument, this major issue about how a breach in corporate security will disincentivize these corporations from pursuing projects that could very widely help the public. On the other hand, side government completely neglected all this, instead narrowing all this debate's issues down to merely the effectiveness of how these corporations fund, and not even mechanizing this properly. They only talked about keeping track of employee relations and business activities and building a meritocracy in the workplace. In the process, they conceded and accepted a breach in employee safety, and were willing to sacrifice this for this goal that will not even be realized on their side of the house. In the process, they ignored alternatives and went through the completely unnecessary measure. Even if we bite the bullet and go along with their case, right? Even if we bite the bullet and go along with their case and somehow identify business effectiveness as the main clash in this debate, they still have no exclusive benefits and they still do not win this clash at all. First off, they do no characterization on the status quo and how the current world makes radical transparency necessary. We already brought up the massive resources and structural efficiency that corporations hold and how this would override all the necessity of radical transparency. These corporations have massive resources, their structure, their corporate structure is super well organized. And so they are more than capable of achieving all the benefits that side government is talking about on their own without a quote-unquote solution that is as drastic as radical transparency. HR can resolve employee conflicts, which, by the way, would actually be caused by side government reaching employee safety completely. And there are various measures in place to make sure that promotions and raises and bonuses are made based on logical bases rather than preference or flattery. Sure, these methods aren't perfect, but they are still better than radical transparency. And they can be improved through more funding and more measures to make sure that they work better. Why would we immediately jump to violating everyone's privacy and completely violating our rights and completely violating the effectiveness of the corporate world when there are so many other measures in place that don't have nearly as many drawbacks and downsides and limitations? Sure, maybe radical transparency has some benefits for these corporations if we take them at the absolute best case. But the downsides outweigh the upsides tenfold, and the current circumstances don't even make radical transparency necessary. As we have said before, there are many other measures in place that can be used and can be improved in place of radical transparency. And radical transparency, by completely breaching a corporate security and the security information, not only violates the rights of these corporations, but also the rights of these employees to have private lives separate from what their coworkers know. That's like, why would you immediately jump to a solution that is unnecessary and has massive downsides to everyone involved when there are so many other measures in place that would be better alternatives? And it's for these reasons that we win this debate. Thank you.
We think that in this debate, the most important stakeholders are the workers, right? As brought up by the first speaker already, we told you that the workers are the people who make up the company in the first place, right? They are the ones who developed it in the first place. They are the ones who run the company and make sure that it is developing, right? We think that these billions of people in the world should be the most important stakeholder, not just because of size, but because that they are also the ones who make up the company. They are the ones who are the company, right? Firstly, I'd like to go over some rebuttals and then over a stakeholder analysis as to why we win this debate. What is the main argument that the opposition side pushes, right? The main argument is innovation. 3 reasons why this argument does not make sense, right? Firstly, we think that radical transparency allows people to find the culprit much easier, right? This means that people who commit crimes such as corporate espionage would be tracked down much faster, much efficiently. This means that they'll be de-incentivized from committing these crimes in the first place. We think that with radical transparency, there'll be much less people who commit it in the first place. But secondly, we think that when in the opposition's world, it is much more likely to happen, right? Because people now know that there is no radical transparency, there is no such security measures that can show who has committed these crimes, right? We think that when these people know that they are much harder to track down, we think that this means that there's going to be more people who commit these crimes in the first place. We think that on the opposition side, there's going to be less innovation, there's going to be more corporate espionage. But thirdly, we think that, as explained previously by the first and the second speaker of proposition, we tell you that there's going to be more efficiency, more execution, because it's going to be shared information, right? We think that because of this, there's going to be faster and more efficient innovation and development in the company in the first place. But what is the second argument? The second argument they bring up is less cooperation. But we tell you that there's going to be more cooperation in the first place. Firstly, we think that your career depends on how other people rate you, right? Therefore, you would really want to be like together with your you would really want to, you wouldn't be like selfish, unfair, or sabotaging others, right? As what the opposition side claims. We think that if we flip this around, that secrecy is even worse because now you can easily steal credit from other people because there is no transparency that records what you've done, right? We think this is much worse and that there'll be less cooperation because you can easily steal credit and sabotage others. But next, let's go over a stakeholder analysis. Why do we win? I'll split this into 2 parts. Firstly, on the workers, and secondly, on the company. On the workers, the opposition side do not actually tell you anything, basically anything about why workers would benefit in this case, right? The only thing that they do tell you is that there's going to be more privacy, which we have already completely debunked their point about that. But on the proposition side, on our side, we tell you that there'll be more fair decisions made towards the workers, right? There's going to be an absolute fairness that allows for meritocracy and it incentivizes the workers to work harder, right? But secondly, from the first speaker, they tell you why there's going to be a less likelihood of abuse and exploitation of workers, right? Why there's going to be less kissing up and unfair decisions made. We think that this means that on balance, that proposition side wins on workers. But secondly, why do we win on company as well? What does the opposition side tell you? They tell you that there's going to be more innovation, corporate development, and less cooperation in the proposition. That is their mainly argument, right? We tell you that these arguments have already been rebutted time and time over again, previously by second speaker, third speaker, fourth speaker as well. We think that these arguments do not really matter in the first place compared to workers in the first place, right? But what does the opposition tell you? Firstly, we rebutted most of the points, right? But secondly, we also tell you that there's going to be more execution, more efficiency, and that leads to more innovation and cooperation in the first place, right? Because of this rating scale, because of these radical transparency, we think there's going to be more efficiency in the first place. And therefore, for these reasons, we win on both the company stakeholder and the worker stakeholder. And because we completely win on the worker stakeholder, which we think is the most important stakeholder, please vote for the proposition side. Very proud to propose. Thank you.